You were clearly going to the same spot. Got passed by 4 people that I then saw in the parking lot. I was like, you were in an empty truck by yourself. Like, you're yeah. I get it with, like, you know, there were like full cars and other things, but there were 2 cars that I was just, oh gosh, welcome everybody.
Oh, well, that's okay. Because it's my notes I used to make that. But, and then there was a piece in the editorial today. No, the editorial today talked about no. Yeah, on the PUC.
I'm just opening up.
Well, yeah, they did.
The meeting on my account. Somebody's.
Anybody who's got a computer with needs to turn their sound off and their microphone off.
Okay, just a second. All right, I can't find it, so we'll just get started. I've got the roll call, which is always where I trip up. Welcome everybody to our July Environment and Climate Committee meeting. We are going to start with our roll call. We'll say people that are in person first. So just say if you're here, Bill Welsh.
I am here.
Covey Chosky. Is that how you pronounce your last name? Choksy. Kelly Jensen, are you here online or is she not?
I am here.
And this is a good test to. We're just getting there. So. Okay, Kelly, will you say that you're here again? We're just testing our audio.
Here? Did you hear that okay?
One more time.
I'm here.
No, it's muted.
Testing.
Oh, no.
Hey, Kersey, can you hear us okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Our audio is not working. Hold on.
Roll call is also an AV check, so that's good.
Oh, that was my bad. Can you say one more thing? Can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect.
There it goes.
Okay. Kelly, can we turn our speaker down a little bit? Good. Okay, thanks for working through that with us. Kelly is present. Kersey is present. Mark?
Yes, here.
Neil is here. Peter? Here. Rory?
Here.
Serena?
Here.
Okay, that normally is the quick part, but was our slow part. And then our ex officios and our Sasha, I don't see either of them present. So we'll go ahead and approve our minutes from the last meeting. Does anybody have any comments or corrections from the June 14th meeting?
I had one small correction that I noticed. Pull it up though. There was just a typo. Yeah, under 3 public comment, it says South Cannon property. It should be South Cannon.
And moving forward, if it's just a typo, just go ahead and email Cassie. Those things don't have to be on the record.
Okay. Anything else besides the typo correction? Great. I'd be willing to entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
A motion to approve.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Online people.
And Kelly has her hand raised.
As in favor.
Yes.
Perfect. That's all of us. Okay, we'll jump over to public comment, and Kayla's gonna lead the public comment. Looks like there's nobody here. in
Have,
person.
you turn your screen off. Thank you. My little timer here. Right. It looks like we have one person on our attendees list. If you are wanting to speak with our committee today, please hit your raise hand function. Okay, we have no public comment today.
All right. So we'll go next to updates.
Yes, so the only update is related to the committee stipend program, which is in effect as of now, where committee members receive a $40 debit card for every meeting that you attend, up to I think up to $500 a year. And so the way that it will work is that people have a stack of debit cards for you all to just take on your way out. We do need you to sign up, enroll in the program. And it is in effect as of today, but we don't have the cards yet. So we'll have retroactive payments for them. So what we have for today is, thank you, a sign-in sheet that I need everyone here to sign for, to indicate that you were here. And for Kelly and Kirsty, I signed off that you attended virtually. And then we also have a stipend enrollment form that we need everyone to fill out. And if you are wanting to opt out of the stipend payments, you still have to fill out the form. And then there's a little box you can check. Thank you. So if you're going to opt out of the stipend payments, you still have to fill this out in the next box. I'm just going to pass these around. And then for Kelly and Kirsty, we do need you to come in and fill out one of these enrollment forms as well at some point. We need a wet signature on it, unfortunately, so we can't email it out. So we can coordinate, or you can just come into City Hall and get that filled out at some point. So go ahead and take one. And then for those of you that are here, if you want to just fill it out and then turn it in by the time you leave, it'd be great. And that's our only update. We'll of course have a lot of discussion about other updates related to the home energy score and other things.
Great. Home energy score program follow-up. You're leading this one, right, Cassie?
Yep. So for the home energy score, what we wanted to talk about today. So we had, there was the working group for the home energy score met between the last meeting and this meeting. So we'll have a report out from that group. I'm also going to start by doing, at the last meeting with the full committee, we had raised a bunch of questions that you wanted us to look into further. I went over those questions, I got answers to those questions, and I went over them with the working group, and I'm just going to go through them here as well and just make sure everyone has all their questions answered and feels comfortable with the program. And then we'll kind of talk about just the process for the home energy score and where we're at and what's next. So to start, I'll just go through kind of the Q&A, if that sounds good to everyone. So the first question that was asked at the last meeting was a question about there is a provision allowing identical homes that are kind of built at the same time and within the same land division. What's the cutoff for when they're considered identical, and if other cities are seeing any issues, if there was any gray area there that needs to be addressed. And what we learned is that for new construction, there's a specific kind of pre-construction protocol that homes can go through, because most builders are selling the homes before they've actually completed construction, which is the case when you have a bunch of, typically when you have a bunch of new homes that are being built with a bunch of identical floor plans. And so with that model, they can get a home energy score by submitting their construction documents, and all the specs that are kind of listed in that document can be used to create a score. So a scorecard. So if you have an area where there's 3 floor plans that are being replicated and there's say a dozen of the same home, they can just they're using that same set of construction documents to get their home energy score. And so that's what allows that kind of like replicating the same score over and over again with just changing the address on it. And so they do have to be truly identical, at least with respect to what their construction plans say. If people buy the home and then make customizations, because that was one of the questions that came up, it may affect what their score might be, but at that point, the house has been sold. So it's not really subject to kind of what, you know, the part of the sale that the home energy score is trying to get at, if that makes sense.
So let me ask a question about that, which is, okay, so then the person buys a house and makes changes, wants to sell the house, they go back through the process again.
Yeah, so
So they have a home energy score, but
scores are good for up to 8 years.
that's what
So technically speaking, someone could make changes to the house and then if they're selling it in 2 or 3 years or 5 years, not get a new score. Typically, yeah, so that is possible. If someone makes their home more efficient, they may be just kind of personally incentivized to get an updated score because it would reflect in a positive way. You know, if they did things that made their efficiency worse, then they wouldn't have to get a new score until.
Without those double pane windows, but single
Yeah, I
pane.
think it happens a little bit less often. But it's not- yeah, so it's probably, but I'm sure it's possible. Yeah. Okay, and then the next question was if anyone, just how does the quality assurance work and can anyone refuse to have the quality assurance completed on their score? And we learned that the way that the quality assurance works is that it's less of Earth Advantage checking the work afterwards, and it's more of like a continual training program where what they do is they'll contact an assessor and they'll say, hey, we were going to do quality assurance. We'd like to come on one of your upcoming scores. So then they assessments. So they do kind of like a ride along and make sure that the assessor is completing the assessment correctly. So for that way too, there's not really like, they haven't had anyone refuse the scores. So that's how it works. So it's a little different than kind of a post verification. Any follow-up questions on that? Okay, the next question was, what does it take to become an assessor from a cost and a time standpoint? Or are there high barriers to becoming an assessor? And I learned that there are 7 steps in becoming authorized to be an assessor. The entire process costs $625 and it takes about a month to complete. It's kind of self-paced, so it can take longer than a month, but if you were just trying to get through it as quick as possible, you can get it done in about a month. Other cities have seen when their policies are adopted, a ton of assessors kind of come on board early on. And so people haven't seen the availability of assessors, especially because of the training process, be an issue. So we don't anticipate it will be one here either. And the training steps involved, there's like US Department of Energy training, and then there's also Earth Advantage training kind of layered on top of that. And then there's like an Oregon license that they have to obtain. And then there was a question, which this is kind of a big one related to enforcement, is can the program be enforced against the real estate professional rather than the homeowner? And other cities have looked into that before. Other cities have felt legally that there's just not like strong legal standing to do so. And I had our attorneys review the same question and they agreed with that. I can have Ian maybe explain that a little bit if he is there. Ian, are you there? Or Mary?
And well, maybe they're coming on. Is it possible, if not to assess if you're not fine or penalty based, but it's more of a communication enforcement like we do with most things of the city? If you're not assigning the penalty, is that communication still able to happen?
Yeah, so that's what we'll talk about next is kind of debriefing from the working group discussion on enforcement, but that is part of what we talked about.
Great.
Okay, it sounds like so if we see Ian or Mary, they can elaborate on the legal question around that, but that's the short answer is that no, we cannot. And then there was a question about if scanning properties for compliance can be automated. And what we heard is that that's another area that a lot of cities have looked into. Earth Advantage is also like highly interested in finding a solution for that because they recognize that just for programs to be effective, that it's a big barrier to have such high resource needs, kind of reviewing the listings. there's been a challenge because it should be easily possible with the MLS data, but the people who own the MLS data it's usually the real estate groups who have not been willing to share the data in that way in order to help enforce the program. And so that's where it's been difficult for anyone to kind of easily find a way to do that. I know that at least one other city has looked into kind of like scraping the data from the listing websites. They, as they were looking into that, they also felt like they were on shaky legal grounds to do that really. So I guess the takeaway I heard is that it's probably possible, but no one has really figured out a terrific solution for that yet. And that I did not have our legal staff. I didn't ask them what they thought about that because we probably have to do a little bit more research into what that would actually look like. So again, and Earth Advantage, they said it's like one of their number one priorities of something they're trying to solve. So there was some brain power going into that, and they'd be highly interested in any city that found a good solution to that. I'm sure everyone would be glad to know. So possible, but more difficult than I think it seemed initially. And then the last question was, what are the inputs to the tool, considering that those would be the elements of the house that strongly impact the score? And I won't read them all, but in the memo that I provided, I was able to actually see like the input sheet that an assessor used, like of all the inputs. And so it's a ton of information about like roofing, attic, foundation, walls, and the type of insulation that they have and the mechanical system. So you guys can review that list in the memo. And that was all for the questions that we had raised about the program at the last meeting. Do you guys have any other questions that you feel like you want to discuss or?
Just for clarification, I'm understanding there is no enforcement mechanism that would be enforced against the real estate agent.
Correct.
I have a related question, but if we have a specific section on the agenda for this topic, it can wait. I don't know if you want to like.
It's on enforcement.
Yes.
Well, we'll kind of talk about that next. So Kavi, did you have a question?
Yes, just a clarification on that part as well. And I think Neil brought this up too, but if apart from the enforcement against a real estate agent, can we make that information public of this real estate group or this real estate agent had this many properties that did not meet this criteria as a means of showing real estate agents that are following the program versus not following the program as a kind of public disclosure pressure, maybe?
I don't know if we could do that. I don't know. We'd probably have to ask legal and some others about that.
And I see Kirsty raised her hand, and I was gonna try to see if Kirsty and Kelly had comments. So perfect.
Hey, I like the idea of maybe we could ask legal if we could kind of do the opposite of like displaying who is helping with this program where it is working well. Is that something we could do, Mary?
Oh, we can't hear you, Mary.
What was the question?
Mary, the question was, well, the first question was, because we just shared with them that we can't enforce the home energy score program like against the real estate professional. So the original question was like, could we publish a list? Could we keep track of the real estate groups that are often in compliance or often out of compliance and kind of publish a list to show like, this is whose clients often don't have a score. And then Kirsty's question was like on the flip side, rather than like highlighting who's out of compliance a lot, could we publish a list of like, here's whose clients have a really high level of compliance with the program? Do you have any like legal perspective on whether or not that's?
Yeah, I mean, in general, it's always better to take a positive approach rather than trying to be, we're trying to get the community on board with this topic, right? So, I mean, my suggestion is not put things in the code about publishing lists, but that the direction to staff is to try to work with the realtor community and maybe develop some SOPs, which we already have in this proposed code, that through we do this through the city manager's authority, but that we can adopt administrative rules so that we see how it's going. And if what we need to do is adopt administrative rules on how we implement this program, that would be the mechanism. But I think, like, is there a case or a statute that talks about, can you publish the name of realtors? No, but I think about things like, oh gosh, there's torts of interference with business relations. There's I don't think you want to start a program with the realtors thinking, oh, we're going to go after you. You want to start a program where you want to get the community, even the ones that are initially resistant, to lessen that resistance and get people on board. And honestly, code enforcement originally said, well, can't we cite realtors? And my analysis, in addition to what I think other cities thought, is real estate disclosure forms that everybody, that you all have probably bought and sold house, we all have to do those, and there are specific things that you list on those real estate disclosure forms. In the ORSs, there is a specific provision that says real estate disclosure forms are done by the property owner only. They are not in any way binding on the realtor or the financial institute. They are a strong lobby. And I would say although this is not subject to real estate disclosure law, to my mind, that's definitely something the legislature put in to protect the real estate, associations. And I just don't think you want to turn this into a battle with the realtors. You want to get them to agree it is helpful information for people they're selling houses to. So my suggestion would be to do whatever you want to do in the future through administrative rules once you see how the program is operating.
Kirsty, you had a follow-up?
Yeah, thank you, Mary. Yeah, so maybe we could think more of like an incentive, of like highlighting. That's kind of what I was thinking of, like, how can we highlight the ones that have been really supportive and really compliant, and the word incentive keeps coming up. So just kind of thinking along those lines. So thank you, Mary.
Sometimes people seem non-compliant when they're truly uneducated or don't actually know. So that's part of our job, is to maybe track who's what we think are compliant, and then reaching out. That'll be the staff person that works with Cassie.
Yeah.
And I just want to say I agree with Mary and Kirsty. I didn't mean it for it to be punitive, but I do think there's value in just knowing that if there are certain real estate groups or agents where it's repeatedly happening and we've informed them, but they're opting not to, and their homes are selling within that time frame where we can't go after, or not go after, but we can't pursue code violations against the homeowner repeatedly for all their homes. I think it's at least valuable to just know if that's available. And I'm getting the sense that it's available, but we don't want to pursue that as our first kind of means of action, which I agree with.
And I think Mary's general point from my perspective of like, we want compliance, and we like, there's a limit to how much you want to put in code of like, well, this could happen, so let's write this very specific thing. This could happen, let's write this very specific thing. But like, our real goal isn't those things. Our goal is having as much compliance as we can, so then the home energy score is as valuable of a tool as possible. And so evaluating, just like Portland did, evaluating what your compliance is. So monitoring compliance and then finding the right tools to try to get that compliance rate up is what they focused on. And so is how I remember it. And so they then were able to implement tools, because that was the piece they focused on. They were then able to implement tools of looking at who wasn't in compliance and figuring out, where that was coming from in terms of just education, assessor availability, like whatever those pieces were, and they were able to get their compliance rate up. So I would imagine if we did something similar, then like, if it takes a while for these programs to get implemented, and it takes a while for them to get compliance and get, all the different groups and figure out what problems we have. We've learned from other communities, but we'll learn from ours as well. And then we could always if the goal is, and then find ways to increase that. We don't have to write out exactly what the communication system is for that. We can figure it out if there's problems that are coming up in the system.
And that's the approach I see us taking with like the real estate professionals. And this is kind of related to what we talked about with enforcement, is like, we may keep track for our own internal purposes of like which firms have really good compliance and which have less, and then just do more outreach and, call them up and ask them like, are you having challenges? Because we'll also learn, like Neil was saying, we'll learn from talking with them, like where are people having a hard time getting the scores done, and see if we can address that a little bit.
Right.
So I think that might be a good segue. Oh yeah, Bill, go ahead.
Just remind me what exactly it looks like nuts and bolts wise on mandatory.
On the enforcement piece of
Yeah.
it. Well, so I think
Mandatory.
that's a good segue into in our last month's meeting, and Bill, I think you weren't here for the last month's.
I know.
meeting.
Maybe I asked a question that's already
No,
answered.
that's all right. We
I can go
talked about
offline.
what enforcement looks like and some of the limitations of enforcement, because there are some for sure. And the discussion that we had last month altogether was that we wanted the subgroup, the working group, to kind of consider ways we could improve enforcement. So we had a meeting about that. So I'm wondering if any of the working group members would want to just do kind of a 2 to 5 minute report out about the discussion we had a few weeks ago, if you guys remember. Otherwise, I can do it.
I'm just pulling it up.
I know, I have it.
Just to have a little bit of information to reference. So I think it was similar to, I think, what Neil actually just mentioned in terms of the enforcement part. Sorry, Kat, I just want to make sure I understand the question, Bill and Kat.
Well, I think if you want to just start with just debriefing what the discussion was.
Yeah.
And then I think Bill's question would be partially answered in that.
It
Otherwise,
was better. I was just going to kind of repeat. kind
Yeah,
of what
well,
you
the
said.
discussion around enforcement initially was, first of all, what's the appropriate days between, knowing that there's a home that's not in compliance and what that looks like. Our group, the subgroup, recommends a 15-day period between understanding that there's not compliance. And from there, it goes through the code system within the city, which is 45 and then 90 after that. And it increases. So the first 15-day period is just kind of hey, you're in compliance. You have a certain period, you have the 15-day time period to complete that. If that doesn't take place, you get, the homeowner gets a fee, and then that fee goes up after 45 and after 90 days of compliance, under the assumption that the house is still on the market and they're still able to be charged for that fee.
yeah. So I'll just summarize too, and it's written in the memo that I included this well too, but just to break it down. So like the first step would be a house gets listed for sale, and then we have a staff person that's not part of code enforcement. They're kind of this like programmatic staff person that we call kind of the proactive layer of enforcement. They review the listings they look on Zillow and Redfin. If they find a house that doesn't have a score, that begins kind of the 15-day grace period that Serena's talking about. And then that staff person contacts the homeowner and they issue a letter that says, hey, we have this home energy. It's like an educational letter. We have this home energy score program. You need to obtain a score. Here is how you can get it. Like, let us know if you have any questions.
Mhm.
And then if that home does not obtain the score within 15 days, this proactive layer of enforcement, they refer it, it's considered a code violation, and then they refer it to our code enforcement division to follow up just per the usual code enforcement guidelines. And so the challenge is that if a home does sell before that 15-day grace period, but even once it gets referred to code enforcement, they have an even longer period of time before fees are typically assessed. If the home sells before then, we don't actually have a way, and they haven't obtained a score, we don't have a way of like going after that homeowner and assessing a penalty. And so when there's a market where homes are selling quickly, that's a bigger problem than when homes are taking longer to sell. So that was part of the discussion we had in the last meeting, was like, is there anything we can do to kind of improve enforcement, with the concern that a lot of houses might just sell before they could get a score.
If the house sells, I mean, so it's a hot market. So the listing goes on, boom, got 5 offers and they take the offer, but there's still a closing time. Can it be enforced during the closing period, or is that?
I didn't hear the question.
Well, let's say it's a hot market.
Yeah.
The house goes on the market, get a bunch of offers, it sells, and they take the offer, but then there's a period of time before it closes. Is the enforcement part of closing, or is it the listing itself?
That might be a Mary question. Mary, I know
Yeah.
your hand was raised as well. Did you hear that part of the question, though?
Yeah. I'm kind of trying to, I mean, Cassie, you've talked more to other cities than I have, but my sense of this program is that for it to work well, we can have these scenarios where, yeah, if it's a hot market and somebody puts their house on the market and there's immediate offers and they haven't done their home energy score, that's a problem. What you want this is to be institutionalized so that the realtors know, so that everybody knows they need to start doing this early before they put their house on the market. And I don't know, has that been the experience in other cities, Cassie? Once the program's up and running?
I mean, other cities have said that if the house sells quickly and they don't obtain a score, they do not pursue that as a violation.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of that's a concern that you might miss one. I mean, what I was going to say is, in my opinion, having written a lot of enforcement sections, there is a story to tell the community here that, like, we're getting a lot of comments and a lot of letters saying this should be a voluntary program, and there's some pushback. And I think part of the story from the city's perspective is that this is one of the more lenient enforcement provisions for a mandatory program that I've seen. And I think that was intentional. And other cities have done this as well, by giving a grace period and then by having one fine of the $750 and then not another fine for a 45 days. The city is making it mandatory, but you are not proposing a really punitive system. Oftentimes what we say is that there is a class 1 or class 2 violation, and every day is an additional violation. I think cities recognize that doesn't really make sense for this kind of program, but it's worth pointing out, in my opinion, that we're not doing that. That is not what's proposed in this code, based on looking at what other cities doing and then the group coming up with its own proposal.
I had a related question as Bill just raised about how this would affect the closing period. And Mary, I think this might be a question for you, but I just want to clarify. The code enforcement action would be against the individual seller when it attached to the property at all. And what I'm getting at, it's not like it would be a title defect that would show up in that real estate transaction closing process. It's only against the individual seller. It doesn't attach to the property itself.
Correct.
Right?
Like it wouldn't be against the new owner. It would be against because they didn't do anything wrong. It would be against the original seller who owned the property.
And as mentioned before, we don't necessarily want to, have enforcement. We want to have education and show and realize why this program is important, and all the ways that we've identified and worked with, the realtors and the education for the residents and the potential buyers on why these programs are important. So while we do need to have some sort of enforcement general plan in place, our focus will be community education and working with the Realtors Association on how to move that forward so we can get the data that we need.
The goal is not to use enforcement.
Right.
Right.
What'd you say?
I said the goal is not to use enforcement. The
Exactly.
goal is for this to be broadly adopted, and that we're able to get as many houses or all listings, reasonable listings, to have a home energy score so it can help consumers through that process. So I think as the program grows too, it grows more in significance. People know what it is. You're listing a second house, or a realtor has then sold houses or had people ask about it. And so it's not just like one path. I think it's easy to think about the first like 6 months of a program and not like, years down the road where it's then just standard and people are asking for it, because it's become a standard thing.
And that's when
The client side, in my opinion, is more or less just learning and understanding where there may be gaps, right, in communication or with certain processes, and understanding those situations versus the actual enforcement itself.
And what we've learned from other cities is that using this system, they have very good compliance, like over 90% compliance. So that was the discussion that we had with the working group, was like, okay, we discussed some of the limitations of enforcement. Is there something else that the working group wants to recommend to add to the program? And my recommendation to the working group was like, I think we should just go with how it's written, because the experience of other cities has shown that it's working just fine. And then we can reevaluate after a period of time in the program. And then if we're feeling like if enforcement is not good, I think the first line of improvement would be doing more of that direct engagement to the real estate community, which we'll do anyway. Like, we don't need to wait for it to not be working, but if it's not working, we can kind of modify that outreach that we're doing to be a little bit more like targeted and really dig into why are we having those issues. So that was what the recommendation mine was to the working group, and then the working group agreed with that recommendation. So it's basically like acknowledging there are these limitations, but feeling like we should still move forward as proposed and then reevaluate later.
Sorry, Covey, did you want to go?
I was just going to make a quick point to kind of support what I think most of the folks here have said. And in my mind, I was trying to just imagine what this looks like once it's implemented, and taking a step back. And if you're a home seller and you're selling your home for the first time or second time, and you're working with a real estate agent, and through that process, you receive a letter in the mail, and just imagining how they would feel if they realize, oh, this is not like, we're not meeting, like we didn't do something right. I feel like that home seller would not be happy with the real estate agent not informing them, because they're usually working with somebody who's handling that whole process for them. So I think that was just helpful for me to kind of think through, like, most real estate agents do want to do what's best for their clients on both sides, as a buyer or a seller. So I think there is some kind of automatic, like, they would want to not have their clients receive this letter from the city. So there's some that carries a lot of weight, I think, by itself.
I had a clarifying question about the 15-day grace period. Cassie, I think you said it would start when the city staff person who's delegated the role of doing the proactive enforcement, right? Checking the listings. If they notice one that does not notice a listing that does not have a home energy score report with it, that's when the 15 days would start. I think that's what you said.
Yeah.
So I want to clarify. I think it should be when the city sends the letter and actually provides notice to that seller. Not just when the staff person, sees it in there, unless they're sending the letter the same day, and we can guarantee that. But
Okay.
the reason I'm thinking about this is, if you put a letter in the mail, it often takes 4 or 5 days to get there.
Yeah.
So this 15 days, I think, is about right. But we should clarify somehow, and maybe this comes later in administrative rulemaking, that clock starts ticking when that seller gets actual notice.
Okay, that makes sense.
And I just saw Kelly turn her video on. So if you want to comment, just raise your hand. We'll kind of add you to the queue. Go ahead, Mark.
Is this a good time to ask about tying this to investments, or will we get to that later? Sort of energy efficiency investments.
I think this would be a good time. I didn't have like a discussion after that.
Well, I was just thinking in terms of, Mary, your point about being positive and thinking about how this should be focused on the productive benefits that this program will have, that it's not just more information, but also ultimately more investments in efficiency, and how there is this incentive then for more efficiency investments. But we've been talking a little bit on revolving loan fund subcommittee about how we can also connect this to the city's support for promoting, encouraging, subsidizing additional investments so that more homes would have a higher score. That ultimately, we're not just trying to make it so that people who happen to be lucky enough to have a great score get paid more, but that you have as many homes with a good score as possible in the city. So, I sort of thinking maybe it's partly messaging in terms of how this is rolled out, as the city in companion with it is going to be making this effort to encourage and also make it more equitable to achieve high scores. So I don't know if there's room for that, or how that would happen, or if even if it's sort of highlighting that we want to be looking forward as a committee in the city towards having those kinds of programs that are tied to this as this rolls out. Have you guys been talking about that at all as a subcommittee?
That hasn't really come up before, and I do think it's a good idea to be communicating that. And I hope by the time the program's getting adopted, we would have, and maybe that's something that the revolving loan fund group we can continue meeting on to like just form that idea a little bit better, so we can kind of propose that as a companion to it. And there may be federal, like we've been talking with the revolving loan fund group, is that there may be federal funds that could be used for that are kind of use it or lose it funds. We're waiting for more guidance on those. So that's not a sure thing, but a pretty good potential use of funds. But even if that source of funding were not to come to pass, it could be part of the program as proposed to the council, is that we also need to, come up with funds to create some sort of program to kind of help people make those energy efficiency upgrades. So kind of pairing the two programs together.
So it doesn't just feel like another hoop or a stick or a hammer, but that this is a mechanism towards encouraging more total efficiency.
And like a streamlining process too, because you're gaining some efficiencies of already having these scores in place. So it's helping us with that identification process. And
So to that point, Mark, your question makes me realize that over time, this program will start to build a really useful data set about, properties in the city, which brings me back to the question about public disclosure of these home energy scores. And it sounds like there were some legal questions whether a city can provide that kind of information about individual properties. But if it were a publicly available data set, it could be a tool for a revolving loan fund to prioritize properties that should be eligible for this funding based on their score. So,
And the data is public because it'll all be in that green building registry, which is publicly available database that Earth Advantage sees. So that is a nice benefit of the program, is that all that data would be available for us and for anyone.
Cool.
Yeah.
I know MLS data, people can, after listing, people can pull data off the MLS, so you don't have, so I'm assuming there's some mechanism. Is there, or do we know if there's a mechanism similarly for home energy score?
Well, they stay there. So the green building registry, once you get a home energy score, it just stays logged in there. So it never gets pulled. That's why we could see your, that test one that was on your house.
Yeah.
We can see if they improve over time, ideally.
Yeah.
One
benefit.
quick thought before we move on, just to kind of Mark's question, I just want to kind of point this out again. I had raised this earlier in some meetings earlier in the year. This program is focused on home owners and home buyers and sellers. But I kind of just want to point out again that about 35% of people do rent in Bend. And I brought this up before as a kind of, if there's a companion program or anything like that, that we could look at to make sure we're covering folks as well who are renting, especially so that they're aware of their energy costs as well, which can be a large portion of their rent often. I know, Cassie, I think you shared, I just checked my email in March that there is another program that ODOE is considering for that. So I just want to kind of raise that flag again so it doesn't get forgotten as we move forward on this.
Yeah, definitely. Odo and Earth Advantage and some of the other cities are, they're starting to, or they had it stated an intention to start convening a group to work on that. So we'll participate in that group as that comes. I just haven't heard more information about that. So I don't know what the current movement is on it.
Mm-hmm.
But I know Hillsborough in particular, when they adopted their ordinance, they kind of made a commitment towards also establishing a rental program. So yeah, that was my approach, was planning on kind of following the state process for that.
That's a really a really good point, kind of these combination pieces now where, you know, I don't know if anybody knows this number top of mind, but the average like turnover of, I don't even know if that's the right term, of properties, like how often a house is bought or sold.
It's 8 years, which is where the 8-year scorecard
Okay.
comes from. That average is like homeowners stay in a house for 8 years.
Perfect. And so that, you know, that can also, you know, be working towards like future goals around rental property disclosures without requiring it from the get-go, that this could be a data set that we could build upon and would be, you know, even if a house is rented, they're still bought and sold. And so when they're bought and sold, you're slowly gathering that data. So you'll be able to have better data in the future that could help support future programs, which is getting my wheels spinning and is really exciting because that's such, I think, 40% or 50% of building space in general, residential, commercial, industrial space is rented. And the disclosures are an important starting point to those of trying to incentivize improvements, because those are often the worst performing buildings because there's a mismatch of ownership and cost. So that's a good thing to flag. Thanks, Covey.
Okay, so if there's no more questions, I guess we'll just go into kind of what the process is and where we're at. So on Monday of this week, I checked in with the working group to make sure they were comfortable with moving ahead in this way. But on Monday of this week, we have sorry, I'm trying to pull it up. So we finished our first draft of the code for this program. And so on Monday of this week, we kind of launched this public facing web page about the home energy score program that just has all the information about the program. I included a bunch of the communications materials that we're using as the stuff that I sent out to you for this meeting. So this is live now. And we also issued a press release that said, the city's considering this home energy score program. We're launching these public input opportunities. Here's where you can go to find more information. And so you can see here, it's got like it's the main body of the web page is just kind of a summary, but then we have these attachments with more details. So we have an FAQ document, and then we have the program details, which is taken from the memo that you guys reviewed at the last meeting. So this is for anyone that wants to know, like, really all the details about how it's going to work, can review all of this. And then we have the draft code is written here as well. And then we invited people through that press release to actually give us feedback directly through a form on this page. And we have been receiving many of those. So that's been really good. And that's something that I can pull a report on at the next meeting and the next couple of meetings to kind of show you all what type of feedback that we're getting through. And then we also shared with them some of the upcoming key dates for the process. So that's kind of like our big public engagement. This is kind of our hub of where if anyone wants information. And so I wrote to an email to you all just, I think yesterday or the day before, like if you all have different constituents or groups that you think may be interested in this information, feel free to just go ahead and, you all can be sharing out this information as well. We're sending it through all of our channels. And I think the hope is now over the next few months is to just make sure there's as much awareness about this program as possible and to be getting that feedback so that we can, as we start to see themes and trends in that feedback, we can refine the program if we feel necessary. And then we have to kind of go over to the timeline. I have it written on here, but I also have a graphic about some of our next steps. So as far as like how the rest of the policy development will work is that Monday of this week, we kind of launched this public information and engagement period. We have scheduled on July 25th, another discussion with the council stewardship subcommittee that Serena and Peter are going to join with me. So that's just kind of like a mid-process council check-in now that we have all the program details to make sure they understand how it's going to work, get feedback from them. And it will just be kind of a good time to just gauge, like where they sit on it or if they have any concerns based on the feedback that they've been hearing or anything like that. And then another thing we added, I think we might have added this since our last meeting, since our last full meeting, is that on August 1st, we're going to host like an open house kind of Q&A session here in the council chambers. And it will also have a hybrid option where I'll do a presentation. So it'll be open to the public. I'll do a presentation that again explains how the program works. And then we'll have time for people to ask their questions about how it will work in a public forum. And we'll have a staff panel. So Mary will attend that with me. Our code planner who wrote the code will probably also attend. And then we're going to have some of the working group members attend that as well. I've also asked Earth Advantage if they'd be willing to attend that virtually so that they can answer questions about the back end or experience in other communities. I haven't heard back yet from them. And so that'll be kind of a nice public forum opportunity. So that's what we have planned for specific engagements this summer. And then in the fall, once we feel comfortable, we'll need the committee to kind of like review whatever the final program is and then formally recommend it to the council. Like, this is the home energy score program we'd like to recommend to the council to consider. So I have estimated that we would be ready for that discussion around the October meeting. We'll check in, each month and kind of figure out where we're at. And it will definitely depend on what the public dialogue is and how much, if we feel like we need to refine it significantly or not. And then if the committee were to move forward with recommending to the council in October, we could do, we'll probably do a work session with the council first. So that would occur in November, and then hopefully get the ordinance first and second reading in December of this year. So that's kind of the timeline and process as we expected. It's always subject to change based on, how it all goes, but that's what we're thinking. So are there any questions or feedback or concerns on that process moving forward?
Good question. We talked a lot about the enforcement conversation of being proactive and working, together as a partner with the real estate industry here. I'm wondering, when is it appropriate to start officially having those conversations? When in that timeline you just outlined do we do that? Because I think we've all agreed, if we can have it be a happy synergistic relationship with our partner in the program, that's will lead to the greatest success. And it seems earlier is better than later. And an idea occurs to me, is there room on one of our agendas to ask CORE to bring someone in and have a public conversation with them in one of our meetings, just so we can be as proactive as possible to get them on board?
Yeah, I would definitely be open to bring them in. So what I have done with them is I've been sharing with them, even as we've had some of anything that I put together for you guys, I've actually forwarded directly to them and give them a heads up. Hey, we're discussing this at our next meeting. So kind of leaving it up to them at what point they want to engage. And I just had an email with them this week. They sent a letter to you all yesterday. I emailed with them to ask when they'd like to have another sit down, me and their staff. And we are planning on scheduling another one of those. But if we'd like to invite them to a full committee meeting as well, I'd certainly be open to that if you all would like that at the August or September meeting.
Question.
Thanks for seeing that.
Percy?
Yeah, I remember we talked a little bit about that at our last working group of the open house meetings, Q&A. Should we have a separate one for them? But ultimately decided to invite them, invite anybody who has a special interest. And I know Peter's met with them, there's been a lot of effort to do that. And we've gone back and forth a lot of also not feeling like we've done a lot too, and reading emails. We've been following up on those emails, having one-on-one conversations. So wanting to also get some more input from other community members as well, and make sure we're not limiting our conversations where a lot of time has been given to that group, I feel like, and in a good way. I think that's been really helpful to do, and to get that feedback. And I'm really curious and interested to also expand that net, and hear from other people as well.
Was the presentation by their lobbyist guy, was that only to our subcommittee or is that to all of us?
I don't
I think that
remember.
I think that was just our subcommittee.
Okay, I thought it was all.
So, I mean, I
I
have
think so.
thoughts on this topic. We can discuss more.
Yeah, we did have a subcommittee meeting with them, and then I think we did a recap with this whole group at one point after that meeting about our findings with our initial conversations.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea of a constructive conversation hasn't really worked out.
Okay.
So what we heard, public facing messaging, is they have concerns about the structure of the program. What I heard directly from them is it's more an ideological debate. So we have to know what we're talking about, because the ideological debate's much more passionate. We actually heard them say that philosophically they like the home energy score, they just don't want to be required to do it. And this is the voices that spoke up loudest. So I'm not putting a blanket statement over all real estate agents. I also think there'd be value to, we are doing a lot of, it feels to me, inbound listening to people. Problem is that we're losing the messaging battle, because the messaging that's outgoing, they have a lot of energy and they have the microphone to produce the message from a small number of voices. And don't have the capacity or the capability or the tools to message the accurate information. So if we're just trying to get the accurate information out, I think it would be great if we were doing that more effectively, as far as in the court of public opinion, so they actually understand the nuts and bolts of the program. Because what the general public and people we talk to around town, they're getting a tremendous amount of misinformation about the nuts and bolts of the project.
Yep.
That's one conversation. The other conversation is the ideological one, and that's just a big rabbit hole of whether it's required or whether it's optional. So I think we need to be clear on which conversation we're having. And it is absolutely the stated position that they're, of the people driving the core official position, that it's an ideological problem.
Kirsty?
Oh, go ahead. Thanks for that, Peter. And just to clarify, like my question or request there was, I think this committee and I think council has made the policy choice that this is a program worth exploring and can help us achieve our goals as a committee through the CCAP. So I'm not interested in the ideological conversation either. In some sense, I think we've already had it. I'm interested in the nuts and bolts and making sure that if this program gets adopted and gets put in place, what are the nuts and bolts that can make it easier to swallow for some of those resistant voices out there. So.
Go ahead, Kirsty.
Yeah, I think that was well said, Peter. And with the FAQs, I'm wondering if we can maybe expand on that to get to the nuts and bolts of, kind of the question being, what all does a home energy score include? And I saw in there are examples of a heating and cooling bill, that maybe a bullet list of some examples of other pieces, because I think that's some of the misinformation out there is that's all it does. And so, I appreciated seeing the question of, can't I just look at someone's utility bill and get the same information? So expanding on some of the other things that the home energy score looks at, maybe even just like an example, I know there are a lot of examples out there as the answer to that question of, here are the other things that a home energy score looks at. And I like this timeline. I think it covers a lot of that, gives opportunity to educate. And I know we've talked about having another working group meeting to just talk about education efforts. So moving away from enforcement conversation, really about how do we educate people about the purpose of this program, the benefits of the program, and how it relates to the CCAP, and kind of get back on track of why we're doing this in the first place. So we will be meeting and to discuss that as a working group.
Great.
Kobe. Thanks, Neil. Just 3 quick points on that. I can't read what I wrote here. Sure. Oh, share the video. So on that point, I just want to mention, because we did have that one presentation from Tyler from CORE to our subgroup, which is online. Maybe even if you're able to just share with the full committee, if anyone's interested in kind of seeing that presentation and what their concerns were raised, that might save some time from having the same presentation done again. So that's one thing I want to mention. 2, I just wanted to also share that I did meet with some individual agents, and 2, I think this was kind of the consensus is, I think once realtors and real estate agents do know a little bit more about the program, I think they're more receptive to it and more like, okay, it's not as big a deal. It seems like, okay, there is some benefit to home buyers when they're representing them. So there's more of an understanding if they're getting that information directly from us. So I just want to share that to kind of support some of the points raised. And the last question I had actually was for you, Cassie, for the open house Q&A. What format will that have? Is that going to be limited to 2-minute segments, or is it like more back and forth? Like,
It's meant to be a back and forth, like a Q&A. So it'll be, yeah, we have to talk. We still have to plan and talk about like exactly how it works. But I think the idea is to have people, we might have to have them fill out. If there's a lot of people, we'll usually like have them fill out forms in advance. We can kind of call people up, but then they can ask their question. Staff can respond. If they have a few follow-ups, we can have a discussion. It was meant to be more of like a conversational experience so that we can just have the opportunity to like explain it and make sure people really understand and build some like collective understanding about it. And there will be a hybrid option, and it will be in here. So yeah.
And I would just advocate to specifically do outreach and invite not chorus, of course, but also just real estate agents everywhere and also builders everywhere, and kind of like specifically say all real estate agents and builders invited to. I don't know if it makes the most sense to keep it at that open house or to invite them to a future meeting where CORE and COBA would be invited specifically. But I do think there's some more benefit doing some more relationship building if possible.
Right. So we will. So the public open house to start will be this one on August 1st. I think it would make the most sense to direct people to that one. We are meeting with CORE individually. I am trying to coordinate a meeting with COBA as well individually. So we do a lot of that stuff. A lot of times those like that relationship building happens better in just kind of the one-on-one meetings, not necessarily like with a big public forum. I'm happy if a committee member or 2 wants to attend some of those meetings with me, I'd be very happy. So you guys can let me know. And if we feel like we need to add things after the August 1st one, I think we definitely can. If there are like specific audiences that we need to have an additional public forum for.
I think we did discuss after that first open house, if there were additional themes or stakeholders that we needed to have more discussion with beyond what we were already doing, we would make sure that takes place.
And we'll try to, make as many people know about that as well. We have a lot of channels, but this is another opportunity. I definitely encourage all of you to as well. Like if there are groups that you feel like you want there, like, you all can reach out as well and we'll have a press release for that event specifically. So it can be like, hey, I'm a committee member. I'd like to invite you to this event, and maybe they'll get multiple invites, but I don't think that's necessarily a terrible thing. So,
and details to follow, but I'm assuming it would be August versus the Monday in the evening.
It's going to be from 3 to 5.
Okay.
Yeah. Like end of the workday.
Great. I see that now.
Quick recommendation for the FAQ, and Chrissy's question reminded me of this. One of the critiques is, can I just request utility bills from the previous owner? And one of our responses is they vary so much based on behavior. I think it would be very impactful to have a like concrete example of that. Like if you're comparing cars, it's obvious, like someone has a longer commute, they're gonna have more gas, like somehow to illustrate how that behavior varies.
Like an example, like if you have like 3 kids.
Yeah,
like,
that could be a good one.
hot showers every day.
Or,
Compared to like
if you work from home or not, things like that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And I'll share an example that was shared in the another forum separately earlier this week that disclosures based on bills are a popular option for commercial properties with the mandatory benchmarking disclosures that happen through EPA portfolio managers. So there's like cities that say for buildings over this amount of size, what's your building type, how many square feet are dedicated to all these different things. And then it is bill based. And the reason why that works is because it's an aggregate of hundreds or thousands of users. And so bills are a valuable data point over a large scale, but for each individual user, it's a very inaccurate tool. And some of that information is publicly available and some of it is not. So I know personally here in town, Pacific Power will give you that data if you ask for it, but 99.9% of people don't know you can ask for it. But Cascade Natural Gas won't share that information. I also know that when I was looking at houses and rental properties and was making those requests, the data was completely unusable. It was all over the board from occupancy, or these people were gone, they give you a high, low average over 12 months and they were gone for a certain period of time, especially when a house is being sold. The most recent years are not a usually representative set of years because there can be a lot of different pieces there. So I asked, and the person on the phone from the utility was like, well, these don't make very much. So not very valuable, and a home energy score would have been much more valuable for my rental and purchase.
The way I think of it, as opposed to just individual examples of why it may change, like if you're going to go buy a used car, you want to know how many gallons of gas that particular used car burned last year, or do you want to know what it's rated to operate at, right? 15 miles per gallon or 30 miles per gallon. I mean, asking what the specific gallons for last year that a car used is not very informative, if that's all you know.
Agreed. I just, cars are different than homes, are used in different ways. I think we could have some examples or data to better explain, the value of the score on this FAQ.
Neil's point just reminded me of a question that I've been having about this. I know some of the home energy scores we've seen from Hillsborough did also include the electric bill part as well as part of the score report. Is that going to be the case for the model we're going for?
Yeah, they all have like an estimated yearly electricity usage. I don't believe it's based off of the usage of the previous owner for these reasons. It's based off of like your score and what they found out, how much it would be. So that way you could look at two homes and you can see like this one has a 9, so it's going to be this much per year. This one has a 7, so it's going to be this much per year, because then it factors in the square footage and that sort of thing. So you can estimate that.
Okay, and that estimate is just based on general characteristics where it's across the board is the same.
Well, the inputs, the inputs that you put into the tool.
But it doesn't include how many people are going to be living there or anything like that, I'm guessing.
That's a good question.
I think
There's an assumption.
energy performance score that's been around for quite a while. That's based on an actual energy model. So it would be number of bedrooms plus 1 for occupants based on the house.
Okay, that's
Trying to
helpful.
figure out that piece, and then they'll take in the efficiency of the heating and cooling system, insulation values, and say, okay, this house. And again, what you're just trying to create is that miles per gallon. Like you don't know how the car is being driven or how the house is being lived in, but as a baseline, as an average, that's what you would expect to pay per month and then annually.
Got it. That's
Carbon footprint associated with that.
That's helpful. So just to kind of confirm, the home energy score process itself does not require any inputs that asks about electric utility bills in the past year or anything like that.
Correct.
Okay.
That's why it's better.
Yeah.
No, just a quick question. When you got utility bills, you didn't give you the previous owner had to get them, correct?
I was not able to get utility bills. I was able to ask for an aggregate high, low, average bill from the electric utility, and they were able to give that to me without the owner giving it to me. So and I don't remember what the time period was. Well, I mean, yeah, that's the information that was available to be shared. And I know that's, I knew that because I know the solar industry uses that sometimes when somebody buys a house to try to estimate because they're also struggling to figure out how to estimate electricity usage.
If you want bills, the utility will give them to the owner. They won't give them
Right.
to you.
Yeah.
We got asked a lot at the utility for bills, and well, you can ask the owner to give it to you. We'll be happy to give it to them.
Right.
As part of our community outreach and education process, is one of the samples of the actual home energy score that's going to be put out there?
I can see if we can get something like that.
Actually, very
Very
clear to read, non-threatening, informative. A lot of people's concerns
Yeah.
are answered by the actual.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
It's a great idea.
Yeah.
That would be really helpful to have on the website too, actually, on that page, just like here's what it looks like, so folks have an idea.
Something that we can use to showcase if we're doing Q and As and talking through any.
And we saw one from, sorry,
What?
we saw one from what's
Milwaukee.
right?
Yeah,
One of the
we've
other
seen 'em.
cities in
Yeah, I
that
have like
presentation.
images of it, but I'll see if I can get like an actual, like, just like a PDF of like one.
Yeah.
I mean, you could pull one just off of the Green Building Registry.
But they probably have an example one that doesn't, that says example.
Yeah. I've seen it.
You can play around the ad.
Caveat, caveat, caveat.
Neil's house.
Let's use that as an example.
And it's not, I hear that people think it's some kind of arbitrary document that's made up. It's actually a standard, based on a standard template from the I mean, you know this, but just for the public record, National Department of Energy template. So it would be recognized whether homeowners are moving around different states, different municipalities. So it is a pretty standardized, useful document.
I think it would communicate too that it is like a specific tool, because some of the things people don't understand is they think like these assessors can go in and just make up, like they won't all be uniform, basically. A lot of people believe that, but it's like, no, you would get this exact thing. Everyone would have this exact thing.
And that's a compromise that there's value in that, as opposed to, if we were designing something from scratch, we might use those tools and add something or do something different. But I think we've found value in standardized process, standardized training, and a standardized product that everybody gets, even though it's not perfect. We'd really like to have blower door testing. That is on net not worth it for this program.
I think the car analogy is great. Again, people can go anywhere around the country and kind of at least get some insights on the miles per gallon rated for the car.
Yeah. Unless there's an exemption for cars over a certain size, because really, yeah.
But it's not going to be something that's uninterpretable for someone from another state. Like people can move around and still understand what the information being provided is.
Well, this was good conversation. Do you have more pieces, Cassie, or
That was all I wanted to go over.
we're pretty close to schedule because we
A little over, but
not too bad.
We can also we can get lunch in between agenda items.
Yeah. So our next big chunk is our natural gas strategies franchise agreement conversation. So maybe we'll do lunch now and then jump into that afterwards. So we'll be back in 5 minutes. Unmute. Bill's coming back. Quick lunch. So we are going to jump into a conversation, a brief conversation. This is not a decision-making agenda item. This is just an information discussion item. Mark, Bill, and I have talked about opportunities to around natural gas in our climate kind of planning goals. So I don't remember what our first slide is, but this is just an open conversation for us as a group. So Bill, did you want to
Sure.
jump in?
So, I mean, to start with, natural gas is a fossil gas. And it's got carbon stored in it, and we're pumping it out of the ground and burning it. And so it both emits CO2 when it's burned, and it also, there's leaks in the system. So, and when they drill for natural gas and frack, methane escapes, and there's leaks along the way in the pipeline. So and methane is an even more greenhouse intensive gas. So this is something we can't not think about in terms of climate action. And when you think about, well, there's a lot of homes, there's a lot of applications for natural gas that are out there, furnaces, there's stoves, there's commercial kitchens, boilers. And they're being put into new homes as we speak. So we did actually, it is actually mentioned in the climate action plan, but I think it is around renewable natural gas, if I recall right. That need to have, so we think maybe there's other opportunities here that we might need to look at besides just renewable natural gas. And we also have an opportunity with the franchise agreement coming up. It's in 2024. So that's something we need to be thinking about as a committee, and thinking about if there's anything in that franchise agreement that we need to be doing that will help address the climate action plan. So gas needs to be addressed. You can't not address it. So there's a lot of talk about renewable natural gas now, and it's basically, capturing methane from feedlots, from cows, from landfills, from sewage treatment plants, and processing it and getting it into this, blending it in with fossil natural gas. And so there's quite a few, the first bullet on there, there's quite a range of numbers that you can find out there on how much of the fossil natural gas can be replaced with renewable. And I picked this one because this is from the Gas Foundation, and they say about 10% can be replaced. I noticed, I was looking at, there was a thing in the paper about natural gas meeting at the Public Utility Commission, and I looked at one of the comments, and one of the Renewable Gas Association, it says that like 35%. So for Oregon. So it doesn't matter. You can say 10, 35, you can say 50. It's never going to be made 100% carbon free, no matter what you do. And to some extent, it's a net zero game, because it depends on where it comes from and what it's replacing and how it's made. That's the other, it can be, if it's coming from, if you're capturing methane, that's one thing. You're going to reduce it. You're still going to burn it and release the CO2. But there's some cases where renewable natural gas is being manufactured, and that either takes electricity or a steam reforming process that they might be burning natural gas to make renewable natural gas. So it's kind of well, they would not be doing that one, but they would be doing it from electricity that you could be selling as renewable directly. So anyway, again, I said it's a zero net sum game there. So one of the things that gets talked about all the time is electrifying, taking renewable or natural gas applications and replacing them with an electric version of it. And there's lots of cases. Furnaces can be replaced with heat pumps. Gas water heaters can be replaced with heat pump water heaters. It gets a little harder when you get to large scale commercial boilers and industrial applications where boilers, for example, and processes. The way the electric system is set up, the demand charges will kill people with bills on switching a natural gas boiler to an electric boiler. That's why they don't do it. It doesn't kill them, but because it's expensive. And so most of the electrification programs have focused on residential. And one of the targets is for electrification is new construction, because it's harder to go back in and take a perfectly good furnace in a house and make a case economically to replace it with a heat pump. It can be done, and people are doing it, but it's more expensive. And as opposed to new construction, there's choices that you can make when you're building a house to how do you heat it? How do you cook your meals? And there's lots of options with induction cooktops and heat pump water heaters. And it's usually accomplished by an ordinance of code. Washington State is starting to require heat pump water heaters. And the way they accomplish it was just say the coefficient of performance has to be greater than 1. So you can't do it with a regular water heater or a gas water heater. So and it's a hot button topic, and in many cases haven't been able to talk about fuel switching, but that's what it would be in this case. And you're replacing a gas option with an electric option. So jump in if there's questions too. I'm just kind of put this together as sort of a background. So listen, why don't we look at the next slide?
I just moved forward.
think she did just.
This was the next one.
Oh, it is the next one?
But I
Oh,
can
sorry.
go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I wasn't paying attention, I guess. Okay, so if you electrify and replace a 96% gas furnace with a regular furnace or with a heat pump that's being powered by fossil fuel electricity, if it's coal, I think we're still more than 50% coal fired in Bend, but that's changing. You don't have a lot of benefit. And sometimes burning the gas right at the end use is actually, it's better than trying to burn fuel, burn diesel or gas or coal in a combustion turbine, because they're really actually quite inefficient. So I have the bullet there about, so we got the whole path to decarbonize electric grid. And that is going to make it a lot more effective as a replacement for gas, because our fuel mix in our electric grid is going to get more and more renewable. So that issue of replacing it with fossil fuel is going to go away pretty much by itself in that case. So, and then of course, people are going to be resistant. So you have the people who I like to cook with gas because I can vary the flame and the heat, but there's a replacement for that with an induction cooktop that is infinitely variable as well. Part of the problem with retrofitting, of course, is if your house was built with gas in it as for the fuel source for your cooking, trying to have the wiring run in your house you're going to have to put a hole in the circuit to run an induction cooktop, and so that's where it gets expensive. So anyway, let's go to the next one. So there have been some electrification strategies, and probably the most highly publicized one is the one Berkeley, California started with an ordinance from the city and said no new natural gas hookups in new construction for residences. And that said, okay, we're going to address natural gas going into the future because you put in gas in a furnace in a house, the lifespan can be 20 years, some cases even longer. And so they're going to be there for a while. And again, retrofit is more expensive than doing it new. And that was what they tried to do to hit the new stuff. And that's a good place to start. It's the least difficult place to start. So everybody jumped on the bandwagon. And so that was the last count I found was 77 different jurisdictions have some form of a natural gas ban going forward. I just listed a few. Multnomah County is on public buildings as opposed to residences. Eugene had just announced it, and I just noticed that they are slowing down to look at the impacts a little bit. But they're intending to do a natural gas ban. And there was a challenge to the Berkeley approach by the California Restaurant Association. And that went to district court and it was struck down, that was dismissed. And because their argument was a city can't regulate appliances, only EPA and DOE can regulate it with a standard. But the argument that they countered with was, we're not regulating appliances, we're regulating supply. So, and the district court agreed with it, and the California Restaurant Association has fairly, let's say they're well-funded. So they appealed to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. I just looked to see where it stands and I see no action. There's been lots of input and testimony up through May, and I see nothing new right now. So it must be kind of waiting to, if it's getting on the docket, I don't know what's going on with it, but it does have an impact if they fail in district court, which they probably won't. It may have some impact on other places doing it. Places.
And
Questions?
I have a question. There's no exception to that at all, even for restaurants?
I think it's a residential ban on the Berkeley one.
Yeah, but you said it's the restaurant association that.
Oh, well, that's a good question. I'm not sure. That's right.
That just seems a little severe if restaurants can't have.
I can't remember if that's on a commercial building or not.
Okay.
it must be.
Yeah.
And I think just like taking this a step back, what the real like kind of question for the group is not, what we're not doing is recommending an action.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
What we are doing is kind of bringing it up to the committee that we have recognized that there is an important aspect of meeting our climate goals that that we think that we should look more into, of what those strategies, like what would have a significant impact on gas use in Central Oregon, and what's technically feasible, what's legally feasible, and what's politically feasible. Because there's lots of different directions you can go with that. Kind of all of our different levels that we can act on, that other actions address around education and outreach strategies, different engagement, efficiency. There's lots of different areas. And so I think this is just an area that we're trying to find. We're just trying to explore more to find what those opportunities are. There are some, and kind of through that, there are some like potential kind of timely opportunities and other things that can be explored, but just that it's an area that we're interested in exploring.
This kind of brackets the options.
Yeah. And so I guess we're not looking for strong recommendations of actions, or, to deliberate or decide on anything like that, but just opening up to the group, because we do have important other agenda item after this, but kind of opening up to the group other people's thoughts about exploring natural gas ideas.
And just to piggyback on what Neil said, I think the nexus or potential synergies with other actions are a key issue for us to consider. And so having the whole group thinking about this a little bit, and where, maybe some of the electrification pieces, some of the revolving loan fund opportunities, maybe something even with the home energy score and how incentives are tied to it eventually, that having the natural gas context in our mind, looking for, are there some good opportunities that we should, give some attention to now? And I think that's part of what the issue is, that there is some momentum here on the ban, but also this franchise agreement where there is potentially some leverage the city could take advantage of in terms of what the next phase of natural gas use in the city looks like.
Big picture, are there systemic grid issues? Could there be too much electrification where you couldn't supply the electricity needed for all of the new heat pumps and all of the new? I've heard this concern. The reason I bring it up is I've heard this concern raised, and if it is valid, it's worth considering. My understanding is we're in a kind of a fuel transition phase, big picture. If you're thinking in terms of decades, we can't just, as lovely as it would be to just be all renewable tomorrow, like that's not feasible, realistic, pragmatic, is not going to happen. So how do we guide a transition that works and is effective?
I
think what you
we
said.
electrified everything right away. If we electrified all of our transportation and all of our vehicles, we would definitely not be able to do that. That's not a question. But that never happens. And so it is a really important thing that we have to plan for, but it's not something, I don't think it's something that we have to plan for. I think it's something that our utilities and our utility regulating board do, and they do that research of what's necessary. So including that in your like big picture policy costs is an important piece of that. But we do have the technology. We're not relying on something crazy to make any of this happen. This is everything we're talking about is with existing commercially available equipment provided by electricity that's existing and commercially available and viable, with infrastructure and a grid that is existing and available. Scaling all of those require different pieces to move. But it is so there's a lot of research and a lot of into that space, but I'm not.
And it can be regionally specific, right?
In terms of infrastructure improvements?
Yeah, and the source. So I think a lot about the source of the energy, an unintended consequence. Everything goes electric and they fire up coal power plants to provide enough electricity. I'd be like, disappointing.
Well, that's why we have, other policies, and, we have a pathway at the state to reach renewable goals.
Right.
And that's why they really benefit from each other, right? So all of these pieces are slowly moving in the same direction. And so it's each individual piece, is getting better.
I think you use the word transition is the right thing to focus on, because it's not going to happen overnight, and it is going to be incremental. And also the PUC is addressing, the Public Utility Commission is addressing this as well,
right,
in parallel to anything that cities would be doing. So they're looking at it from the state, and both from the electric side and the gas side. So it's being looked at in a bigger picture, and how does the grid supply? And I know that same thing is happening at the Northwest Power and Conservation Council is starting to, they're starting to include gas, and at some point they'll be able to talk about electrification. Right now they can't, but they're trying to figure out how to meet demand as well, not just power, not just energy.
Yeah, Oregon Department of Energy has had a series of renewable energy siting studies going on for the last few years. We've been on one of them where they're looking at where they need to develop new renewable energy and how much and what the timing needs to be, in part to think about where the supply and demand issues are relative to the transmission capacity and some of these forecasts around what demand will be for renewable energy. So I agree. I think there is probably a lot of proactive effort at the state level. It's true whether it's going to be there in time. I think US Department of Defense has actually been involved in it too, and has been funding some of those through grants, those programs, those studies by the state. So I think there's a lot of interest in making sure the grid is sufficient once we get there.
And Mark, that it's the ORESA, the Oregon
Yeah.
Renewable Electric Siting Assessment, and it's DoD funded, you're right.
Yeah.
Quick note, Bill, you mentioned the PUC has been looking at natural gas. I know just a day or two ago, they held a big public hearing to hear from stakeholders.
Right.
What I have heard is that the PUC feels like they do not have the regulatory authority at the local level for like a no new hookups, no new gas hookups type of policy for them to impose on the natural gas companies. So what, to me, that says absent a change in state law, it kind of does fall to local jurisdictions, at least right now, to make some of these choices. That's my
So we'll have to
understanding
follow that.
so far. Yeah.
I want to make sure we have our next big agenda or important agenda item is about the new working groups with Serena. So we can follow up on other ideas in this area, but thanks for the discussion.
And Serena, I just have your slides from last time if you need them.
Start talking through for sure. So as we discussed in our last meeting, we created kind of high priority areas of concern that we're going to work through. And our next two that are up are the outreach food waste prevention program and the multifamily recycling project. The idea, we again brought it up last time, just kind of as a teaser to say, hey, think about these two components. And if you're interested in supporting as a subgroup member, I guess we could go through them again. The multifamily recycling, it's talking about improving recycling at multifamily residences, working to understand current code and potential future code opportunities, and then also education. Education's around all of these, right? That's we say that, but it's in everything that we're trying to do is just educate and understand current obstacles. And then the other one was the food waste prevention. And this is again, more educational campaigning to promote food waste, working to create some examples and stats on food waste. There's a lot of opportunity here, as the CCAP has shown in terms of being able to, really reduce here. And so if there's any one that's interested in either one of these as a subgroup member.
And I recommend for both of these two topics, there's a lot of kind of existing work going on in these areas. So for each of these subgroups, I would recommend that we start by just talking to some of the relevant stakeholders, which would be like the county, solid waste services, the environmental center does a lot of programs on behalf of the county as well, and then perhaps someone at the state level. So
yeah, as a reminder, kind of like when you started these other subgroups, there's a lot of initial individual research and understanding, kind of creating those stakeholder opportunities, and then convening, as an internal subgroup on kind of next steps and creating that plan for what this looks like. We're talking about it now because summer is moving fast. We don't necessarily need to start research in our timeline until this fall, but this fall is going to be here in 30 days. So
we actually did in these, we had research started in Q3, which is now.
Yeah, Q3. I keep forgetting that we're in Q3, July's.
Yeah. But anyway, the point is that for those groups, I have some ideas on who we could kind of talk through first. So we have some ideas on how we can move forward. So it won't just be just swirling unless you have additional ideas. We had in the last month, we talked about this. Covey had expressed potential interest in both. Mark, you had expressed interest in food waste. You are not committed to that, but just to remind us.
Yeah.
So it'd be good to know if either of you two are still interested in those groups. And then if anyone else would like to be at, it'd be good to have at least 2. 3 is great. I know that we have a lot of groups and people are really busy, but
and as a reminder, Neil and I will always be supporting one or the other. We'll always be part of a subgroup on some level. So
in the overall set of subgroups that we have right now, do we have a list of that? Because I'm also thinking, for example, a revolving loan fund feels like it might go a little dormant almost for a bit, which I could think of as freeing up time. And are there other subgroups that we know we will need in the near future? Was there going to be a committee tied to water efficiency or water wise? And when we had all of those meetings with the department, I wasn't clear. If
Yeah, it's a good question. So these two are the only two remaining like CCAP ones. The home energy score working group is gonna have work to do. But I would say the revolving loan fund we discussed is kind of in a little bit of a quieter stage. And then we had also had a group on the 100% renewable, which is also kind of at a quieter phase right now. So these are the only two like CCAP ones specifically. It's the water wise committee engagement is done. They had talked about they are going to start convening those technical working groups that we may have an opportunity to join, to have like a liaison for that. So, and there may be other opportunities like that that come up, but these are the only like kind of ongoing bigger programmatic ones.
Yeah, I'm happy still to be involved in the food waste.
Just a clarification, because in the meeting minutes, it mentioned Peter was interested in that. So I don't know if that was a mistake.
Oh, I could have sworn it was Mark, right?
Yeah. Just so the minutes might just.
I know Peter didn't, he didn't correct the minutes, so it's.
They've been approved.
Sorry, Peter, you're part of it.
We're gonna look at your salad, make sure you finish.
Was there anyone on the phone or on video
Oh,
that
yeah, Percy or Kelly,
has any?
raise your hands if you have any interest in either of these groups.
This is Kelly. I'm happy to support the waste of materials.
The food waste one?
Yeah, waste of materials.
Okay, it's food waste specifically.
Okay.
Like, I guess these are both waste and materials. So there's food waste prevention and then multifamily recycling are the two different ones in there.
I'm probably better suited for multifamily recycling.
Okay, great.
And I should probably wait until I come back from maternity leave in like January, February to figure out where I can be most useful. So
Yeah, that sounds
I'll probably
great.
just wait.
Probably, were you interested in one or both still?
I think I'd mentioned just depending on time commitment. So if it's something where it seems possible for me to do both, I could do both.
Okay, so do you want to be like included, I guess, in the coordination? Like if I start sending emails, do you want to be included on
Yeah.
those?
I think for both, and if I have to step out of one, it would be the outreach food waste. I'll stick with the multifamily recycling. So that would be the priority one.
Okay. And then do we have anyone else that is interested, or we could, I mean, I guess if Neil and Serena, if you guys are intending to kind of like fill in a little bit,
Yeah,
we might be
Right.
good.
I would love to sit in on as many of the multifamily recycling ones as I can. As
I
a,
will do the other.
yeah, great. Yes.
Makes it easy. I was happy to do either one, so.
Perfect.
Okay, that's a good start. And yeah, we'll just see how these evolve. Great, thank you.
I want some information posters parents can put next to the table for their kids. So targeted at 4-year-olds.
Okay, I think that's all we needed from this one. We will also be doing at least one committee recruitment. So we'll have a new committee member in January. So we'll see if they would like to jump in.
Yeah. And this is also another area that we had talked about in the, I don't know, the meeting after the last meeting, of opportunities for us to be more effective at accomplishing our climate goals, is if we're reaching a point where we have enough work happening outside of the meetings that we don't have enough committee members, that it's something that we could ask for more support by asking for more committee members. The timeline doesn't line up because of how that process has to open to be able to do the recruitment at the same time. So that's just an open question for the group. If we formalize, or there's enough of these committees, that's something that we could start a conversation with council if they'd support that growth of the committee.
You all talk,
We fit at the table.
well, and also, yeah, Cassie, is there sort of a capacity bandwidth number of subcommittees that staff can deal with at one time?
Yeah, but I don't feel like we're there. Yeah. Like, I feel like it's given how few committee members we have, I think that the capacity limitations are probably stronger on the committee side. Um,
I remember when, because I was part of the CCAP, I remember when we were creating this group or recommendations for this group, we wanted to keep it somewhat small to start. Sometimes if you start too big, it's harder to like phase in versus starting with kind of a core group and then being able to expand as needed.
It's also something to keep in mind, like next time we do, like, you know, in a couple months from now, we'll have a new biennium. So we'll need to do a new set of like, what do we want to prioritize this biennium? So this was the first time. So kind of right sizing how many things we can pull off in 2 years was a little bit of a guess. So just, it'll be good information to take forward when we're planning for what can we do in the next 2 years, you know, now that we've seen like everything we want to do does require some more of that committee work on it. So anyway.
I just wanted to ask a clarifying question to what Neil said about it. Does it make more sense if we do decide to, as a committee, ask for more members to have it be ready by the end of the year? Is that
It's not, the timelines can't align. So it doesn't help us. If we ask now, the timeline to get that approved would be beyond the recruitment timeline already.
For the person? Okay,
Yeah, so it doesn't.
but we can still do it next year if you want.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you, guys.
Okay.
Agenda review.
Yeah, so let's, I guess we just want to make sure that we have a good agenda set for August. So right now, all we really have for the August meeting is that, like, I'll provide some more updates on the home energy score. There won't be a ton, we'll basically kind of report out on the engagement that we've had so far. And we don't have any other agenda items. So some potential topics that I put out there is if the working groups had a chance to meet, like there would be an opportunity. I think it sounds like that's probably unlikely that we have a working group convene and have something to bring back to the group. We had talked about getting some CFEC updates, which if they're still interested in that, I can have Damien come give an update on that. I think it also probably wouldn't be a huge, super long agenda item, but he could do kind of a 10-15 minute report out. So do you guys have any thoughts on what you'd like to use the August agenda for?
I think the CFAC update would be nice. We haven't had an update in a little while. I
It's,
think some of us are following it, but
it's timely with the
it is. Yeah.
July, the potential permit.
Mhm.
I don't know what I'm trying to say. The rule is getting a non-temporary status. The decision is going to be made this month. So August will be great timing for that.
I also know we had decided at the last meeting that there would be a climate emergency declaration kind of working group update as well, which didn't happen today because I haven't done some of the necessary follow-up work. But hopefully we can have that ready for the next meeting.
Okay.
Just as an update, the group did meet and we had a discussion. So we just need to do some follow-up work to have someone present to the full committee.
Yeah, if you're ready, if it's a little bit smokier, then.
Has anything been happening with the reach code
Oh, yeah.
that we could maybe get an update on?
We
I'm-
did include in September to have updates on the
Well, that's rebuilding task force.
task force, and we'll also have updates on
Okay,
the.
so let's wait till then, right?
Because I'm gone in August.
I got it.
And we've been, I guess I could have shared this as an update, but for the rest of the committee, we have been doing these staff workshops on the EV readiness plan that Neil and Bill have been attending. So we're doing two rounds of that. So those will be done by the next meeting. So I'll be able to give an update on what's happening with the EV readiness work as well in September. Okay. Well, that's good. So it might be a little bit of a lighter meeting, but it's August. So if we wrap up and leave, that's great. A lot of committees didn't have July meetings, so you guys are already.
Overachievers.
A
Yeah.
lot to do.
Do you expect this working groups that the waste and materials working groups to meet before that meeting or it'll be after?
Before the August meeting? I'll send out emails to you all and see what availability is. It'd be great if we could. But it just depends. I mean, I know it's a little bit more difficult with vacations and stuff.
Yeah.
I'll be out the second, like the third and fourth week of August, so.
It would be nice, so based on Mark's question, to just have just a visual of who's in what groups and what current subgroups are existing. I think, just a screenshot of what subgroups exist, whether they're part of the CCAP or external, like the WaterWise one and others, just so we can, and I think I have a good idea, but. nice
Yeah, I can definitely do that for sure.
Even just so we remember what we're committed
Yeah.
to. And so we're not letting any balls drop.
Right.
No, it would be good to just have that tracker.
Okay.
As they phase out and phase in for new. Thank you.
Well, if we're operating on the analog clock back there, we still have a few more minutes, but
Slow.
it's a little slow. We'll use that for returning from lunchtime. But we are at time. So unless we have any comments from our committee members online, I think we can adjourn this meeting. Not pausing, but I'm not seeing anything. So thank you all for July's meeting. Great work. And we'll see you again next month.
Nice.
Nice job.